In 2024, the world was in chaos, with wars burning everywhere. In 1988, Detective Thomas investigated murders with strange neck wounds. Found Raya, the girl who was the murderer. She was a time traveler. Why was she going in the past? Why was she killing people? Keep watching to learn some shocking truth. The movie started in 2024 with scenes of countries burning from ongoing wars. Everyone was fighting each other. The story then went back to 1988. We saw a detective named Thomas who went with his friend to investigate a recent accident where the driver had died. They found 3 holes in the girl's neck, and it turned out that 2 other people in the city had died the same way, with holes in their necks. Thomas and his friend visited a lab where the doctor confirmed that all 3 victims had died from the same type of injury, but they didn't know what had caused it yet. Later, Thomas found out that another girl was attacked in a club, but had survived. He went to the club with his companion, where they met another detective who was Thomas's wife's brother. They interviewed the girl, who was very frightened. She said a girl in a blue hoodie with blood on her hands had attacked her. While she was talking, she suddenly felt pain in her neck and died in agony. They discovered the same marks on her neck, realizing she was also killed by the same girl who had killed the other 3 people. They arrested everyone wearing a blue hoodie and began investigating. While Thomas was in the car with his companion, they saw a girl in a blue hoodie running. She covered her face and tried to escape when she noticed them. Thomas and his companion chased her. She reached the railway station. Thomas's companion sneaked up and grabbed her. She broke free and hit him with a board, injuring his foot. Thomas arrived and confronted the girl, now known as Raya, with a gun. Raya told Thomas that his wife would have a baby that day, but his wife would die afterward. Thomas didn't believe her and tried to capture Raya. They fought, and Raya cleverly handcuffed Thomas with his own cuffs. As Raya tried to leave, Thomas grabbed the weapon she used to kill people. He attacked Raya's leg with it, causing her to lose balance. The train then hit Raya, and she was thrown away and died. After Raya's death, Thomas felt relieved, thinking he had solved the case. When he went to the hospital, he learned that his wife had a baby girl. Thomas didn't pay much attention to this, thinking it was just a coincidence. Later, a doctor sadly told Thomas that his wife's condition had worsened. They saved his daughter but couldn't save his wife, who had died. Thomas was heartbroken and shocked. Raya had predicted this, which made Thomas wonder how she knew. Years passed, and Thomas's daughter turned 9 years old. On her birthday, he took her to her mother's grave, where someone had left flowers. Thomas thought it might be his detective friend or his wife's brother, but they both said they didn't leave the flowers. Thomas wondered who did. He then got a call about a new murder in the city, done in the same way as the murders in 1988. Thomas went to the crime scene and saw a recording showing a girl in a blue hoodie who looked like Raya. He began to believe that Raya hadn't really died. People said the killer might have worn the blue hoodie to confuse them. Thomas had doubts, so he reopened the file on Raya from 9 years ago. In her belongings, he found a key. He gave the key to his officer friend to investigate. Thomas then learned that another girl had been murdered at the airport. When he and his friend went there, they saw the girl had the same holes in her neck. This meant the killer was still using the same method as 9 years ago. Thomas also found out that the murdered girl had a writer's book with her, just like the others who had been killed. This raised many questions for Thomas, but he couldn't find answers. The key Thomas had given for investigation turned out to be for a plane made a year ago. Thomas worried more because if the plane was made recently, why did Raya have the key 9 years ago? Then, a scientist who was also a doctor approached Thomas. He told Thomas that during a red moon or lunar eclipse, there was a time when people could travel to the past. He had even built a machine for this purpose. Thomas and his friend didn't believe the scientist, so they ignored him, and the doctor left, feeling discouraged. Thomas and his friend went to the location of the plane that matched the key. As Thomas went alone, Raya appeared and pointed a gun at him. Seeing Raya alive, Thomas was shocked. She had died in front of him. So how was she alive now? Plus, she hadn't aged at all. With a gun pointed at her, Raya was about to tell Thomas something important when his friend entered the room. Raya turned around and accidentally fired the gun, killing Thomas's friend. When the police arrived, Raya forced Thomas onto the plane. While flying, she told him he would be amazed to see her alive. She explained that she traveled to the past to fix the future. If she didn't do this, everything would be destroyed. She could only time travel during a lunar eclipse. Thomas realized this matched what the doctor had said earlier. Before Raya could explain more, she pushed Thomas out of the plane, and he managed to escape from the water. The next morning, when the police investigated, they found only pieces of the plane. The plane had crashed, and Raya was missing. Thomas told everyone about his encounter with Raya and her time travel, but no one believed him. Later, we saw a scene set in 2006. 9 years later, Thomas's life had completely changed. He had left his job as a police officer and spent his time reading about lunar eclipses. Thomas hadn't seen the scientist doctor for a long time. His daughter had grown older and was now living with her mom's brother. Thomas learned that a murder had happened in 1998, but there were no reports about it. So he went to the grave of the writer who had been killed. When he opened the grave and checked the skeleton, he saw that there were holes in the neck, meaning Raya had also killed him. Next, Thomas visited the writer's house and met his wife. She told him that before her husband died, he ran a group and wrote a book. Thomas found a paper showing that this book was owned by everyone who had died in 1997 and 1988. Thomas also learned that a friend of the writer was still alive and was running the group. He knew that Raya would target this friend next, since it was the night of the lunar eclipse. Thomas rushed to find the writer's friend, but he was too late. The friend had already been killed. Thomas saw Raya running away from the scene. He shot at her, hitting her hand, but she managed to escape. Thomas chased her to a large pipeline near the seashore. When Thomas reached the place, he saw the time travel machine on the other side of the pipe. Raya was sitting in it, and the machine was filling up with water. The machine then vanished with a bright flash of light. Raya traveled back to 1988, where she died because of him. They later found a bullet in her body, which Thomas had shot at her in 2006. Thomas understood everything now. When the police arrived, he tried to explain, but no one believed him. He was arrested because the police thought he had killed the writer's friend. Later, in 2015, 9 years had passed. Thomas was still trying to solve the strange case. He always waited outside the pipe where Raya had gone into the time machine. It was also the night of the moon eclipse, and he was sure Raya would come back. Even though his daughter was about to have a baby that day, Thomas stayed behind. He wanted to catch Raya and find answers to the questions that had troubled him for years. Finally, the time machine arrived and landed there. Raya stepped out of the machine, and Thomas aimed his gun at her. He demanded to know who she was. Raya said she was Raya, granddaughter. She explained that she was traveling through time because he had asked her to. She began her journey in 2024, time when the world was burning and falling apart due to wars. This destruction was caused by a book written by a writer in 1988. After reading this book, people were greatly influenced and began fighting, turning the world into a battlefield. To stop this, a scientist created a time machine. It could only be used once every 9 years on the night of a moon eclipse. Raya traveled back in time to kill those who caused the wars, hoping to save the world from ruin. Thomas noticed that Raya's hand had no bullet mark. This meant that after her mission in 2015, she would travel back to 2006, then to 1997, and finally to 1988, where she would die because of him. Raya gave Thomas a bracelet he had once given to his wife. Thomas was troubled to learn that he would be the cause of his granddaughter's death. Thomas told Raya to stop traveling to 1988 so he wouldn't have to kill her and then go back to the future. Raya said it wasn't possible because her time travel only went one way. She could only go back to the past once and couldn't return to her own time. Each time she went back 9 years, she would kill the writer in 1988 so he couldn't write the book that caused the war. Thomas felt sad when he heard this. Raya then told him to go to the hospital because his granddaughter was being born that day. She left after saying this. When Thomas arrived at the hospital, his granddaughter had just been born. He was happy to see her. Meanwhile, Raya kept traveling back 9 years each time, killing everyone who would start the war. Finally, she reached the writer and killed him before he could finish his book. The film then showed the future, in 2024, where the destruction had ended. Everything was calm, and no wars had broken out. Raya had died during her mission, but she had succeeded in saving the world. The movie ended here.